Hi everyone, I'm John Ritland back with part 3 of my retro review of Bret Hart's failed WCW run. So I left off talking about how the death of Owen Hart completely understandably, hurt Bret deeply. There was talks of him not even coming back to wrestling, and nobody would have blamed Bret if he hadn't come back to wrestling. Yes, he has contract to fulfill in WCW, but I'm sure they would have let him out of his goddamn contract. Or let him just sit at home for a number of months and just said, okay, hey, would you like to revisit this? If you don't want to come back to wrestling, we can mutually part ways. Because losing family, there's nothing that can prepare you for that. Losing, I mean, especially family, but losing, like, even a close friend. Bret's lost a lot of close friends, and that would have deeply affected him, and would have deeply affected anybody, especially when you've been up and down the road with them. But with Owen, it was so goddamn tragic. And it was a preventable accident, yes, and the Dark Side of the Ring is going to cover this. That's another story for another day. I'm still sad to this day about Owen Hart and his death. Imagine if he had been in the mix in 2000, 2002. I think he probably would have left sometime after that. It would have been very interesting to see what Owen could have done. And Bret cuts his promo and basically, he needs some time away. Understandable. He needs time away. Because he was supposed to return, had that accident not happened, he was supposed to return soon after his groin surgery. So he wasn't seen on TV for a number of months. Okay? If he was never seen on TV again, like as far as WCW, nobody would have blamed him at all. But he comes back in September of 1999, and everything's going good. I think it was like mid-September 1999, so it was just after Fall Brawl 99, or just before. The timeline of some of these pay-per-views kind of is muddied up, and especially because WCW in 99, like in later 99, was spiraling out of control. Because this is shortly after Eric Bischoff had been fired. So Bret Hart comes back, and he's automatically, cheered, revered, because fans know that he lost his brother, and also they respect Bret. They respected him, back that whole the metal plate thing I talked about in part 2. And if you haven't seen part 2, part 1 and 2 may be above my head if future me will remember to put that in. But with Bret, he comes back to team with a newly, face Hulk Hogan, who's back in the red and yellow and stuff like that, because everybody wanted to see Hulk Hogan in the main events again in 1999. They say they did, but they didn't want to fucking see that, and evidently the ratings weren't even all that good anyway, because WCW fell in a hole they can't get out of, and they couldn't get out of, rather. But they went to face a newly heel Sting, so this actually was right after Fall Brawl, and Lex Luger, who would later be, renamed the Total Package instead of, or he'd be the package instead of Lex Luger, the Total Package Lex Luger. It was a stupid name change because Miss Elizabeth would basically be part of his entrance, strip off his pants and everything, right down to his tights, and that would be it. And Liz also was one of those that just got hotter with age. Sweet Christ, I also hate Lex Luger for being involved in her death. And whether she was an adult or not, he didn't take responsibility. So, anyway, we're looking at what Bret did. Bret teams with Hogan. Cool. They got the stuff going on. They got, they're going to try cooking again. We're going to heat Bret back up. And then he beats Benoit on the Nitro, where it was in the same building a few months prior where Owen's accident happened. And it was Bret versus Benoit. An incredible match. It was either October 16th or October 23rd, 1999. It was one of those 2 days. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it would have been earlier. But it was in October of 99, and I know that much. And it was an incredible match, as you would expect with these guys. These guys put on an incredible performance. And you could argue that it was Benoit's best match in WCW to date. It was Bret's last really great WCW match, or his last great match, because then they would muddy all the stuff up. He would lose to Sting just before Halloween Havoc, and that'd be some fresh goddamn bullshit, because it was a heel Sting, and he was the champion, the WCW champion, and then they did a whole bunch of other bullshit because Luger interfered. And then Bret lost to Luger at Halloween Havoc 99. So, all that stuff we were going to do to help Bret, nope. It's in the fucking bin. It's all goddamn done. And Bret would just be kind of floating around here, but this was around the time where they brought Vince Russo in. And Vince apparently saw something in Bret because he had worked or Russo it seemed, because I really shouldn't call him Vince because he doesn't deserve that name in wrestling. He's Russo because Vince McMahon at least succeeded in wrestling. Russo, for all his ideas, was just an idiot. He was a goddamn idiot. So Russo kind of puts his idea where there's going to be a bunch of younger guys, and Bret's going to be one of those guys who was underutilized. Even though he wasn't a younger guy, he was somebody that WCW could have used better. And they decided to vacate the championship, the WCW championship, due to bullshit. That was when Sting, I believe, had Hogan lay down for him, or Hogan lay down for Sting. And even though the bell never rang, Sting was declared the victor after putting his foot on Hogan's chest for the 3 count. And then title got relinquished, all that stuff. Goldberg had won the U.S. Championship from, I believe, Sid Vicious on that same show. So, Bret, already his return had been torpedoed. He wins the U.S. title from Goldberg and then loses it very soon after in a ladder match with Scott Hall on Nitro in November. Sid and Goldberg had interfered because they were still feuding, because everybody had to fucking interfere and everything because Vince Russo's a goddamn idiot, because we just had to have car crash television. I will say that the ratings did slightly improve for about the first month or so, but they couldn't have gotten much worse, so really they were just getting back to somewhat respectable numbers. But WCW was never going to have a rebirth because AOL Time Warner was going to start the merger in January 2000, and WCW was losing so much money. By 1999, they had lost $15 or $20 million, if I remember the figures right. So that was pretty goddamn ridiculous. Attendance was sliding down. Pay-per-view buy rates were sliding down. They had no fire to the company, even though they had a lot of great talents. They went to Mayhem 1999, and Bret won the championship. And I believe that was in Toronto also. So he won the championship. He was a WCW champion. About 2 fucking years after he debuted with the company. So you got all that going on. Bret had beat Benoit, and they had that great match before, and Bret was going to be on the warpath. He was going to be the WCW champion. They were going to do some great stuff. He won Tag Team Gold with Goldberg. I think from Creative Control, if I recall correctly. You know, the swastika-bearing Harris brothers. If you don't believe me, one of them at least has swastika tattoos, or one. That's normal. That's really normal, isn't it? That means they're just good old country boys. And not on the right side of history. So, leading into Starrcade, we got tag team champions. And then we got the WCW championship on the line. And then Goldberg and Bret would lose the tag team championships. I believe the Hall and Nash. And then we would have Goldberg versus Bret. This is the infamous match where I've talked about this stuff. And I can already see I can just feel my blood boiling about it. Goldberg did not intend to injure Bret. I do want to say that right here. That much is obvious. Goldberg did not intend to injure him, did not intend to injure anybody. Could have, because of how hard he hit, but he was never a wrestler. He was a great athlete, a former football player, and had a look and really made the most impact he could in WCW with the few minutes of action that he got every single week, because he could not have a long match. Because then it got exposed, oh shit, this guy can't fucking work at all. He hits the spear, he hits the jackhammer, and that's it. And he had a few minutes each match, and even if he sold a little bit, he didn't really know how to do it. And yeah, I'm speaking as a fan using smart words, but you could tell that Goldberg didn't know what he was doing. But with the right guy, he could be led. So he's facing Bret. And Bret has been quoted as saying to Goldberg, his last words were, "Don't hurt me. Whatever you do, Bill, don't hurt me." What's first thing that happens to Bret, that Goldberg does? Sidekick. Fucking just hits him. And Goldberg's already stunned and thrown off his goddamn feet because he's not agile at all. Despite the fact he could do a backflip pretty easily. I mean, he did that in I believe, his debut match or soon after. He could do some stuff, but then he was injured, he was beat up, and he really didn't seem to care at that point. He did that stuff where he injured Bret. Now, accidents happen, injuries happen. That wasn't an intentional move, but then the rest of it. Bret would get hit. He would hit his head on the concrete during a figure 4 ring post spot that Goldberg did not help ease up on. Like, you help ease up, your opponent's impact, where yes, they will eventually hit, but if it's a softened blow, then it's fine, because yes, the person doing the figure 4 spot will drop straight to the ground. And if the opponent has any goddamn intelligence with them, the person taking the move, they will say, okay, ease up, and there we go. Okay, not almost, squeeze one out or whatever, or have a goddamn shit. That's what that sounded like. But no, Goldberg injures Bret. If Bret didn't suffer at least 3 concussions in that match, I would actually be shocked. Bret was completely out of it, and you could tell. You could tell he had no goddamn idea where he was. I would be amazed if he even remembered the match, except for when people show him clips. Because I've had concussions. I'm not an athlete, but I've had concussions, and there are things in my life I don't remember. Little sidebar, I was in a car accident in like summer of 2002. I only know what happened based on what people told me. It was so severe. There was one like where it's like I know it was a freeway accident. I got bumped and then I bumped into the back of somebody. And I ended up where I looked later because I had to go get stuff out of the car where it was in the junkyard. The car was totaled because it was a little commuter car, and there was a dent about that big, like, so basically about, I don't know, let's see, that big. It was like it was a huge indent. I mean, I can't really describe it all that much. Let's see, something like about that, something about like that, where it was a pretty decent sized indent in a solid, interior. And I don't remember much about this, and it made me nauseous and sick. And if you've ever had a concussion, So I can't imagine suffering 3 of them, reportedly 3 of them in one match. Because Bret was goddamn out of it. He didn't have a clue what was going on. Roddy Piper came out, and they did the screw job thing again. They did another screw job finish for Roddy Piper with a freaking, Mo Vaughn style brace on his elbow. I think he just had elbow surgery. He came out and declared Bret the winner. Because we had a whole bunch of bullshit and everything, and Goldberg had lost. So Bret was the WCW champion. But then vacated it and said, no, I can't win the championship that way. So already Bret has been the champion. Then he relinquished it, and all this stuff was falling apart. No, yeah, Bret had a severe concussion or more. But then he continued to wrestle, unfortunately. We had, beating Goldberg on December Nitro, where NWO 2000 was formed. And Bret was the champion again. And it was Bret, Jarrett, and I want to say Hall and Nash, but then they got away from Hall and Nash being involved in it because Hall was having a lot of his issues and would be gone from the company soon after. And then so he's the champion again. He would wrestle Terry Funk in a hardcore match on an episode of Thunder, I believe, and would take weapon shots to the head. So already he was not in good shape, and taking those weapon shots to the head didn't fucking help. So then the title was vacated, and you would have Benoit and Sid fight over the championship. It was supposed to be Bret versus Jarrett, I believe, but Jarrett suffered a concussion, and Bret, his brain was pretty much mush by that point, so they had Benoit and Sid wrestle. Benoit beats Sid. Sid's foot's under the rope, so they can do a disputed finish on next night, but then Benoit leaves. So right there, looking at 2 years after Bret Hart had made his WCW in-ring debut. Debuted as Sold Out 98, and by Sold Out 2000, because of the post-concussion issues and not being taken care of, whether Bret went out there to try and do some stuff because he was a gamer, or whether the company forced him out to do stuff, which I tend to believe there's some truth in the middle of it, Bret Hart was out. He would make infrequent appearances on TV because he was still under contract and he would still have a whole bunch of stuff to do, but guess what? Oh yeah, he couldn't wrestle. He wasn't wrestling anymore. He would do like a cage spot at one point, kick the cage door in on Goldberg, and I believe the War Games match, or the Tower of Doom match, in I think September of 2000. And he would do stuff like that, but he would not appear that often on Nitro, and he was basically out of wrestling after that. His contract ran out. He suffered the stroke. He would be brought back into the WWE fold. Vince McMahon did personally call him and tell him a whole bunch, tell him he's a fighter. He is going to succeed. He's going to beat this. They made peace. It did take a while for Bret to make peace with Shawn. I don't blame him, but there was a lot of fallout from this shit. But just looking at the totality of it, from part 1 to part 2 and this part, looking at what they could have done with Bret, he should have been a megastar for them. He wasn't a fucking megastar, and that's the disappointing thing. If he had been featured as the talent we knew he could be, we fans knew he could be, Even back then, because at the time when Montreal happened, the Montreal Screwjob, I was 16, almost 17. By the time Bret had suffered that concussion, I was 18, almost 19. I knew that Bret was messed up because I was still watching WCW at that point, but I had switched to where I was watching WWE live and I was taping Nitro. And Bret was so beat up and so, so out of it that it was sad to see. And then they would have the return match against Vince at, Mania 26. But let's not talk about that because that made me sad. And it was shit. But WCW totally botched up Bret Hart. I'm not saying that Bret's heart was always in it. And I'm referring to before Owen's passing happened. But I also don't blame Bret for not having his heart in it because let's look at it. He was so white hot and could have done so much achieved so much greatness in WCW, beaten the doors down, I believe kicked the doors down and just unleashed, and he didn't. He wasn't allowed to. Hogan held him under his thumb, and a whole bunch of other shit that happened. And yes, maybe that's just a fan of me wanting to blame Hogan. But to be fair, there were a lot of times where Hogan did hold a lot of people down or do a lot of stupid shit just to maintain his top spot. Let's not forget that Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair were main eventing pay-per-views still in 1999 and even early 2000s. Let's not forget that. That's the kind of fucking horseshit we were dealing with. And Bret could have been the anchor to help. He could have helped out Nitro. He could have helped out Thunder. He could have done so much good shit. And he didn't do that. He did not fucking do the thing. Because he wasn't allowed to. And sure, maybe that's the fan in me talking. Maybe I'm being blinded a little bit by fandom. But just looking at everything that could have happened and all the factors leading from his exit from WWE to just a few weeks after, it was like Bret was completely forgotten about. And that's just something I will never be able to fully grasp. So I'm going to end this video right here. But basically, it was a failed run for a variety of reasons. But WCW Brass basically fucked over Bret. And I will never forgive the fact that they did this because it was fucking stupid. It was fucking bullshit. And no amount of excuses from people are gonna, people can have their opinions. They can like Bret, they can not like Bret, that's fine. But I don't think anybody can objectively look at WCW and how they got Bret and not admit that WCW made every possible mistake for whatever reason. Egos or anything. It was set up to fail when it should have been their biggest success. It should have been bigger than Sting versus Hogan. Because by that point, if they had done the finish correctly there, if they had had it where Sting had beaten Hogan straight up, and then had Bret maybe go heel and challenge Sting, you could have had something there, but they just didn't do it. They just didn't do it. And I'm never going to understand how WCW had something, they had every opportunity in their hands, and they just dropped it, and then they sunk further and further and further. And to this day, I am still upset about the fact that WCW does not exist. Because it should still exist. We should still have this competition going. It's blunder after blunder after blunder. But anyway, that's all I gotta say. So let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.